I mean, I don't have any power or relevance, so I'm perfectly comfortable saying abolish capitalism. Sure, sure, sure. I just mean if you're trying to convince people, right? Abolish capitalism is a shockingly unconvincing argument to a person who hasn't been exposed to good socialist arguments. The thing that made Marx distinct from a bunch of other people, people credit Marx for socialism. Guy wasn't the first socialist, not even close. There were tons of people at that time who were regurgitating essentially the same talking points, you know? The robber barons are taking everything, the workers barely get anything. People have been saying stuff like that for thousands of years. I'm sure people were saying that under the pharaohs, you know? The thing that made Marx different was his intelligent and thorough deconstruction of the ways in which capitalism worked. Not just how it worked then, in a moralistic sense, but in a very structural sense, and how it related to a broader theory of history, you know? And that's what made him different, and that's what made him compelling, you know? Not to say the average person was more literate back then, because as much as it may feel that way sometimes when reading Capital, they weren't. The most ardent socialists were upper middle class academics, same as today. But the way he approached these things, you know, he did make an effort to convince people in ways that hadn't really been tried before. It's what made him so unique. I was always tickled by, after the publication of Das Kapital, Marx and Engels both had a bunch of young socialists pitching ideas to them about producing media that was socialist, right? Because Engels had a lot of money. He owned those factories, or just one factory. I forget how many he owned. Whatever the case, he had money, right? And there were young students coming up saying like, hey, would you be willing to publish this book? Would you be willing to give this like a name? You know, we're socialists. We want to further this cause. The problem was Engels, smart guy, even if his on authority writings were bullshit, he read these books and they were very moralistic, which he and Marx did not like. You know, these books were very young, intrepid, earnest proletarians striking back against the factory owner, the landlord, and so on. And the reason Engels and Marx didn't like these was because they thought the arguments we're making fundamentally are not moralistic. Marx was not interested in writing a book that said it's not fair that working class people get so little, because that griping, the idea, well, it's not fair, nobody cared. Oh, sure, working class people care, but it's hardly convincing. You don't need Karl Marx to write a book telling you that poor people aren't happy with the fact that they're poor, you know? He wanted materialist arguments about how this relates to a broader set of historical patterns, a dialectical pattern. He wanted things that built off Hegel's writings. He wanted things that sort of examined it as a part of a materialist process of agitation and resolution. You know, and moralism doesn't fit into that. You can be a socialist. You can read what Marx wrote and agree with all of it and be hideously classist against the poor. There's nothing about what Marx wrote that spoke of the necessity of liberation, at least on a moral front. Now, Marx did make arguments in favor of liberatory politics for a variety of practical reasons. That's where you get stuff like the what was it, tendency of the rate, a rate of profit to zero. You had arguments about the self-contradictory nature of capitalism. You had arguments that were essentially making the point of, listen, even if you don't have a moral horse in this race, you should still be aware of these problems. You should still be aware of the fact that, like, there are structural issues here. Does that make any sense? Does everyone understand? Like, that's what made Marx special. His ability to look past the easy moral argument and address it in a more pluralistic sense, you know? And a lot of what he said in terms of, like, these structural issues, these cultural issues, they were very pervasive and very prescient, right? Obviously, if you took Marx to today, you know, he would, I don't know what he'd say. Marx would say this, Marx would say that. Marx in 2025, I am quite fond of this la boubou. I have no idea. He wouldn't say it in a French accent, probably. But who knows? We don't know. We don't have any recordings of his voice, probably. What would he say about la boubou? Probably wouldn't be that impressed, to be honest with you. He couldn't have imagined what the economy looks like today, but I feel like he could have, like, kind of imagined it, you know? The idea that more and more money would be siphoned out of the real economy and be pushed into the speculative economy, that was already happening back then. It has nothing to do with fiat currency or it being backed by gold. It was just like the fact that from an economic perspective, you know, if you run the economy and you're the capital class and you're, let's say, morally unconcerned with the well-being of the vast majority of the population, you know, it makes sense that once you have the productive, efficient capacity to meet people's basic needs with relatively little effort, which we have, by the way, food, shelter, clothing, we can produce what people need now more efficiently, more readily, more disposably than ever before. It's trivially easy. We could have abundant resources for everyone to meet their basic needs. If those resources are provided abundantly, that means that it's not very profitable to sell them at the low prices that the efficiency of their production would allow for. See, the capitalist modality still drives these prices down, except in the most extreme cases of artificial scarcity. Or to put it another way, groceries, relative to how much they have cost in the past, are very cheap today. The only real exception to this is healthcare, because it's an inelastic good that's mired and obfuscated in a multi-tiered financial system that allows for ludicrous prices to be made up, discarded, and made up again, and housing. Those are the two big exceptions. But for a lot of basic human necessities, let's say cleaning supplies, food, clothing, there's a lot of stuff that is, let's be clear, absurdly cheap. You can go on Amazon and find stuff that would have been an exceptionally difficult to procure specialty item back 50 years ago. Nowadays, it's essentially free. There are factories in China making it, shipping it across the world to you for nothing, for pennies on the dollar, and the margins on these products are low. Walmart is not making a lot of money on every individual sale. Walmart, the dollar store, these places operate on very, very, very thin margins, because even though the whole economy is being run by, you know, the capital class, they're still subject to these systems where even in artificially scarce environments, they are still seeing their prices being pushed down to incredibly marginal levels. So I think Marx would look at that and go, yeah, no shit, man. Housing and healthcare aside, right? Like, yeah, no shit, obviously. So if there's no longer a tremendous amount of money to be made in these environments because the productive efficiency of our industry, our ability to meet these needs, it's gotten to be so good. If it's no longer profitable there, where do we make our money? Speculation. Oh, sure, you could make a few billion a year being Walmart. You could make so and so much money selling clothes or food. You can run a coffee shop with a 2% return on your investment. You can run a convenience store where at the end of every year you tally up the money you've gotten, and after you've paid your wages and paid your taxes and paid your bills, you made a couple $1,000. Great. Or you get a president in office that pressures the Federal Reserve to lower the interest rate so that you can borrow money very, very easily, because the cost of borrowing money goes down across the economy. And then with that borrowed money, you invested in highly speculative economic blocks like AI, NVIDIA, anything in tech, anything in Silicon Valley. You borrow money for pennies on the dollar, paying barely anything in interest, because the returns on average that you make when you invest into NVIDIA are so much higher. You can make a couple $1,000 running a convenience store. You can make $100 billion in a year by being lucky with your investments. Why would anyone choose to keep their money in the real economy, where it's dirty and grimy and subject to things like frequent and consistent taxation and labor, and you've got to pay the bills and you've got to manage this stuff, when you can just keep it in an infinite magical bubble where the money doesn't really exist, not in a physical sense. There's not like a vault of $400 billion that Elon Musk owns. It's a combination of the worth of his assets and his stocks and his bonds, and just let that number grow. That's the problem that I'm talking about. And by the way, Marx predicted it. Marx predicted it. Marx predicted it. That's all I'm saying. I'm just saying he did. Marx wrote on it. Marx wrote in it. He wrote on the productive capacity driving down the profitability of industries that relate to human needs, and therefore a lot more money ends up getting driven into speculative economies where you can make ungodly amounts of money for much lower risk, as long as you keep the government complicit and you keep the cost of borrowing money down. Don't forget, Marx didn't really mention women's emancipation. Okay, Hillary Clinton, what are we talking about here? I didn't say Marx was perfect in everything. I said that his economic critiques of capitalism were prescient. which everyone agrees, by the way. You all know real economists, capitalist economists, okay? Well, mainstream economists that in these fields, Marx is respected, not necessarily agreed with, mind you, but respected. No one, you'd have to be an idiot to do this like conservative culture war posturing where you're like, Marx, he's like a lunatic. Like, no, everyone who knows anything about econ understands at the very least that it's a foundational theory for a reason. Did Marx support MLK? Well, he was pressuring Lincoln to free the slaves, so. Really, I didn't know that? Yeah, they wrote letters back and forth. Lincoln never wrote back. I thought Lincoln wrote back once. Didn't Lincoln write back once, but Marx sent a couple over? I could be wrong on that. Maybe Marx just sent letters over to... Either way, Marx did encourage him to free the slaves, so. Marx double texted. Ooh. How did Marx feel about Alexander Hamilton? He would probably despise Alexander Hamilton. Are you kidding me? The wannabe monarchist essentially like built the foundation of Wall Street. What about the play? I'm sure he would find the play delightful. Anyway, you all get my point. Sorry. Marx would have called AI demon tech as well. Oh, that's for sure. He absolutely would have. Yeah, because he did write on alienation. Yeah. He would have been extremely consistent on that. There's no way he wouldn't have been. Actual quote from Lincoln, labor is the superior of capital and deserves much the higher consideration. Yeah, I've heard Lincoln was a cool guy. Shame he got shot and Reconstruction ended. Why do uneducated people call Marx a communist when he wrote Capital in a way, to my knowledge, refuting the Communist Manifesto? He wrote the Communist Manifesto. Marx was a communist. Though Marx didn't distinguish between a socialist and a communist. Do you? I don't really think it matters. What's the difference between socialism and communism? I don't really think it matters. You can create whatever definitions you want, you know?